What a perfect specimen for my fungus. I will use these great value sliced mushrooms to awaken him. Arise!
Dude, just wake me up next time.
Oh. Hi, I'm Al, and today we're going to be identifying the Circle of Spores Druid. Druids who belong to the Circle of Spores are ones who see beauty in decay. They see within mold and other fungi the ability to transform lifeless material into abundant, albeit somewhat strange life. And as a result, they have an interesting relationship with undead, not seeing it inherently wrong, but rather seeing its value in the cycle of life and death, only seeing problems with undeath when it tries to dominate. The circle spells, which you get at second level when choosing this circle, are always prepared for you and do not count against your number of prepared spells each day. The spells that are always prepared for you are the Chill Touch, Blindness/Deafness, Gentle Repose, Animate Dead, Gaseous Form, Blight, Confusion, Cloud Kill, and Contagion. So this spell list isn't very bad, but it's also not something I would consider particularly great. I think thematically it fits the Spores Druid very well. However, things like Gentle Repose are spells that I don't necessarily see come up a lot. Though Animate Dead is a really solid spell on this list, being able to have a small army of either skeletons or zombies is very strong, and I think it's very thematic for the Circle of Spores Druid. It immediately comes to mind that sort of fungus that takes over ants and controls their bodies. I do think Chill Touch is a weird one on this list. I understand why it's there, but I do kind of think it conflicts with some of our other abilities. At second level, you also get the ability Halo of Spores, which means whenever a creature moves into a space within 10 feet of you or starts its turn there, you can spend your reaction to deal 1d4 necrotic damage unless that creature succeeds on a Constitution saving throw equal to your spell save DC. This damage increases at later levels. Overall, I really like the idea of this ability, the idea of harmless spores floating around you until you decide to sick them on a creature is really cool, and it evokes a very strong imagery for the Circle of Spores Druid. However, my problem with it is it's very mechanically weak. Being only able to deal that 1d4 necrotic damage when you get it, even though it increases at later levels, I just feel like it's not enough. And since it uses your reaction, you can only do this once per round. So even though 10 feet is actually a fairly big area and it's easy to get off, you're only going to be using it once per round anyway, so you're only dealing 1d4 necrotic damage and then 1d8 and 1d10 later, and it's just really not enough. So at second level, you also get Symbiotic Entity, which is one of your main defining features, at least for combat. And as an action, you can spend a use of your wild shape to awaken your spores. In doing so, you gain a number of the following benefits. First, you get temporary hit points equal to 4 times your level in this class. When you deal that Halo of Spores damage, you roll another die and add it to the total. Also, when you make a melee weapon attack, you can add 1d6 necrotic damage onto the total. So these benefits last for 10 minutes until you lose the temporary hit points or you use your wild shape again. So this ability again is very cool, but I have one main gripe with it, and it's if you lose that temporary hit points, the ability stops working altogether until you use your wild shape to use it again. That means it's going to be really hard to build around this ability specifically because you don't know if you're going to have it in 1 turn of combat or 5, because it all depends on enemies hitting you, and it's not that big of a hit point pool to really defend you. I mean, we've all been in that situation where we have Armor of Agathis up, and in one hit, the enemy completely depletes all of the temporary hit points. And I think you're going to see that a lot with the Circle of Spores Druid, particularly at these lower levels. Another thing that really grinds my gears is the fact that it's also in action. So realistically speaking, I kind of see a Circle of Spores Druid using their action the first turn of combat to activate this ability, and then using their bonus action to cast Shillelagh, which means they have dealt literally no damage at this point to the combat encounter unless they were lucky enough to get off their Halo of Spores ability. Overall, I don't think this is a good use of your Wild Shape resource. In most cases, I would just recommend you Wild Shape instead because you'll have a bigger pool of hit points, you have a little bit more versatility with what you can do, and it's gonna be a little bit more varied. I really want to like this ability. It just has too many problems with it, and the extra benefits don't add on to the fact that they're so temporary and it takes an action and a use of your Wild Shape. I just don't see myself using this a lot, and that's not something you want to hear from a Circle of Spores Druid. At 6th level, you get Fungal Infestation, and whenever a beast or humanoid dies within 10 feet of you, you can use your reaction to animate it. The now newly animated creature is now a zombie with 1 hit points, and it obeys your mental commands, only able to use the attack action to make 1 attack. And you can use this a number of times equal to your wisdom modifier per long rest. Okay, so this is actually one of the abilities that I really like. At this level, you already have Animate Dead, so you have that long-term utility of resurrecting creatures, but you also have this kind of freebie ability that only lasts for 1 combat encounter generally, where you can take an enemy that has just died and turn it on your side for a little bit, and even though it's at 1 hit point, it's using the zombie stat block, so it has a little bit of staying power due to that Constitution saving throw or still be up kind of effect. Even though you do have access to Animate Dead, I do kind of wish that the zombies stayed a little bit longer, maybe a number of hours equal to your proficiency bonus or something like that, just so they have a little bit more use, especially since you have to be within 10 feet of it when it dies, so you got to make sure you're there and your buddies aren't killing the creatures on the battlefield so you can't resurrect them. But overall, I do think this is a good ability. Being able to add more actions to the field that are on your side is something that's really good to do in D&D. Not to mention that it's a complete flavor win. I think it's very cool, and it's exactly what I want to do as a Spores Druid. Taking over other creatures' bodies as they die is immensely cool. So at 10th level, you get Spreading Spores, and while your Symbiotic Entity is active, you can use your bonus action to hurl spores within 30 feet of you, where they kind of land as a 10-foot cube for 1 minute. The spores disappear early if you use this feature again, if your Symbiotic Entity is no longer active, or you use your bonus action to deactivate it. Whenever a creature moves into the cube or starts its turn there, they take your Halo of Spores damage unless they succeed on a Constitution saving throw against your spell save DC, and they can only take this damage once per turn. And while the cube of spores persists, you can't use your Halo of Spores reaction. So this ability is kind of cool actually, but the only problem I have with it is if this was already baked in to the Halo of Spores feature earlier, I think it would have really buffed it up and made it actually useful. And since it's a later level ability at 10th level, I'm really disappointed that I lose my reaction as part of my normal Halo of Spores. I get the ideas that you're sending your spores away from you and having further versatility with dealing that damage, but I'm really disappointed that I can't just do both. I think the power level wouldn't be crazy. In fact, I think it would make it somewhat decent. I do like that this gives you a valid thing to do with your bonus action, but other than that, I'm a little disappointed that we didn't see this earlier or just as part of that normal Halo of Spores ability. In fact, if it was baked into that earlier level ability, then this later level ability could have been as simple as you can deal your reaction Halo of Spores damage and send it out at the same time, and that would have been cool, and it would have given you a little bit more power, and it would have symbolized your greater mastery of this Spores feature. Next, and lastly, at 14th level, you get Fungal Body, which means you can't be blinded, deafened, poisoned, frightened, and any critical hits against you are treated as normal hits unless you're incapacitated. Now, I think this ability is fairly cool, and I do like it, but it's just kind of, I don't know, a boring 14th level ability. I do think it is powerful, and it's really cool to see that critical hits can't really land against you. I think that can be a really cool moment for you as a player, and as the DM's like natural 20, and then you're like, but it's not a critical. But other than that, I just don't see a lot of value in this. I also don't really agree with the narrative, especially since this is your last ability. It just doesn't feel like it matches the flavor and the vibe and the energy of those earlier level abilities. So that is it for the Circle of Spores Druid. If I were to rank this one in relation to the other Druid subclasses available in 5th edition, I would give this one a 2.5 Cauldrons out of 5. I really like the narrative in the spirit of this class. I just feel like the mechanics just really suffer, and I would just much rather play a different subclass Druid. However, I do really like the design approach that they're taking with this and the Circle of Stars, where they're changing the use of the wild shape, allowing you to do different things with it. I just think if you want a competitive use of wild shape, then it's going to have to be a little bit more power than the Circle of Spores Symbiotic Entity allows for. I also think that Chill Touch kind of conflicts with the Symbiotic Entity ability, because Chill Touch is an action to cast and it's a ranged cantrip, and in order to get that extra necrotic damage, you have to deal a melee weapon attack with Symbiotic Entity. I get that it might be there for when your Symbiotic Entity isn't active, or if you just need to do a little bit of range damage before you get that added utility of moving your spores. However, I can't help but to feel like it kind of conflicts mechanically with what a Circle of Spores is trying to do. Obviously, it kind of wants to be a melee druid, but also it's getting this ranged cantrip, but it's also sending in buddies to fight for me. It's just a little bit confusing, and I wish the mechanics supported what it wanted to be doing a little bit better. So what do you think? Do you think that this ranking is fair, or do you think it should be ranked a little bit higher or even lower? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below, especially if you think I might be missing something with this subclass. If you like this video, please consider subscribing or just hitting the thumbs up button. Either would help us out immensely. And if you like this style of content, Ben and I are doing this as part of a series called Identify. Currently, we're going through all of the Tasha's Cauldron of everything subclasses and giving our own personal thoughts and rankings on them. I'll link the playlist up above there. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you on your next short rest.